Deportation politics, then versus now, and why the sudden outrage. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and welcome to Haylee's Commentary Desk. Tonight, we're talking about something that, depending on who you ask, is either law enforcement or suddenly a constitutional crisis: deportation. Not new, not controversial, at least they weren't. But now apparently it's a problem. So let's ask the question no one in Washington seems eager to ask. Why now? Let's start with the facts. In 1952, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, also known as the McCain-Walter Act. The law established the federal government authority to detain and remove individuals who are in the country illegally. Then came 1965, the Hart-Celler Act, and then, in 1986, the Simpson-Mossy Act. Major reforms. But here's what didn't change. At no point did Congress impose a sweeping requirement that the immigration agents must obtain jurisdictional warrants from the federal courts for a routine enforcement, because immigration law has long operated as a civil system, not a criminal one. Now, let's talk about President Bill Clinton, because this is where today's outrage starts to fall apart. Under Clinton, immigration enforcement expanded, deportation surged, millions were removed from the United States, and yet no widespread demand for jurisdictional warrants, no claims of systematic illegitimacy, no political firestorms, just enforcement of existing law. Then came President Barack Obama, a president still widely praised by many of the same voices criticizing enforcement today. And yet he became known as the deporter-in-chief, because under Obama, millions of individuals were deported. Immigration enforcement remained aggressive. Administration warrants, not jurisdictional ones, remained stand. And again, no national outrage over warrants. No demand over overhaul the system. Now fast forward. President Donald Trump enforces immigration law. The border is tightened. Illegal crossings are reduced. Interior enforcement increased. And suddenly, everything changes. And now we hear we need judicial warrants. This is unconstitutional. This must stop. Now, after decades of presidents, let's examine that demand. Because on the surface, it sounds reasonable. But more oversight, more processes, but in reality, it changes everything. Immigration enforcement has always relied on administrative authority. Shifts that to the jurisdictional warrants, you do not add a step, you add an entire system. That brings us to a critical question. What happens when the enforcement action must go through federal court? You create a surge in filings, a backlog of hearings, a system already under pressure, pushed to its limits. And when the courts are overwhelmed, cases don't move quickly. They take years, sometimes decades, and during that time, individuals remain in the country. Not because their cases were resolved, but because the system simply could not process that fast enough. So we have to ask, is this about the due process or is it about delay? Because if you cannot stop enforcement outright, you can slow it down. If you can't eliminate deportation, you can bury them in procedures. And over time, enforcement doesn't disappear overnight. It just becomes inefficient. Now let's take the next step, because delay has consequences. If millions of individuals remain in the country for extended period because cases are tied up in court, that changes everything, socially, economically, and politically. So let's ask a question directly. Is this about a humanitarian concern or is it about a long-term political strategy? Because when policies result in more individuals staying in the country for years, sometimes indefinitely, that can have a ripple effect. And it raises a serious question. Is the Democratic Party attempting to build or reshape a future voter base? Because if enforcement is delayed, if removal becomes unlikely, if precedence becomes continuous, then the long-term outcome is clear. And then there's a funding fight. Democrats are trying these demands on Department of Homeland Security funding, holding fundings in place until enforcement policies change. Think about that. National security funding used as leverage to reshape immigration enforcement. This isn't just about deportation, it's about control. Control over the how laws are enforced, how fast does the enforcement happen, and ultimately what the future looks like. Because when long-standing policies suddenly become unacceptable, not because of the law change, but because of the politics said, then we're not witnessing a legal shift. We're witnessing a strategic one. So here we are. Same laws, same authority, same tools, but completely different reaction. And once again, we're left with the same question. Why now? Is this about principle or is it about power? Because when slowing the system becomes the strategy, you have to ask what the real objective is. I'm Haley Ficuciello with Englebrook Independent News.